Epiphenomenalism is a position on the mind-body problem which holds that physical and biochemical events within the human body are the sole cause of mental events such as thought, consciousness, and cognition. According to this view, subjective mental events are completely dependent for their existence on corresponding physical and biochemical events within the human body, yet themselves have no influence over physical events. The appearance that subjective mental states, such as intentions, influence physical events is merely an illusion. Epiphenomenalism is a controversial view, but it has been defended by some prominent philosophers, including Thomas Huxley and Gilbert Ryle. It is often seen as a way of solving the mind-body problem, which is the question of how mental states and events can be causally related to physical states and events. One way to understand epiphenomenalism is to think of it as a type of parallelism or dualism. This is the view that mental and physical states and events exist independently of each other, but that they run in parallel. Epiphenomenalism is a type of parallelism in which mental states and events are caused by physical states and events, but they do not themselves cause anything. Another way to understand epiphenomenalism is to think of it as a type of supervenience. Supervenience is a philosophical relation in which one set of properties supervenes on another set of properties if and only if the first set of properties cannot change without the second set of properties also changing. Epiphenomenalism is a type of supervenience in which mental states and events supervene on physical states and events. This means that mental states and events cannot change without the corresponding physical states and events also changing, but the opposite is not the case. Physical states and events can change without the corresponding mental states and events also changing. There are a number of arguments for epiphenomenalism. First, there is the argument from causal exclusion. This argument is based on the observation that physical events can cause other physical events, but mental events cannot cause physical events. For example, a push can cause a person to fall, but a thought cannot cause a person to fall. This suggests that mental events are not part of the physical causal order and therefore cannot have any causal effects on physical events. Then there's the argument from anomalous monism. This argument is based on the observation that mental events are very different from physical events. Physical events are objective and public, while mental events are subjective and private. This suggests that mental events are a completely different kind of thing than physical events and therefore cannot have any causal effects on physical events. Next, we must consider the argument from the impossibility of knowledge of other minds. This argument is based on the observation that it is impossible to know for sure what other people are thinking. This is because we can only access other people's minds through their behavior, and their behavior can be caused by a variety of factors, both mental and physical. This suggests that mental events are not directly accessible to other people and therefore cannot have any causal effects on other people's behavior. Another argument is made from the causal ambiguity of behavior. This argument is based on the observation that the same behavior can be caused by different mental states. For example, a person might raise their hand in class because they want to ask a question, or they might raise their hand because they want to go to the bathroom. This suggests that mental states do not have a unique causal relationship with behavior and therefore cannot be the sole cause of behavior. Epiphenomenalists say that we should consider the illusion of free will. This argument is based on the observation that our sense of free will is illusory. This is because our behavior is ultimately determined by physical events beyond our control, such as our genes and our upbringing. This suggests that mental states, such as our desires and intentions, do not play a causal role in our behavior, and therefore cannot be the basis of free will. Finally, some philosophers have argued for epiphenomenalism on the basis that it is the simplest explanation of the mind-body problem. They argue that if mental events have no causal effects on physical events, then we can avoid the difficult problem of explaining how mental events interact with physical events altogether. There are also a number of arguments against epiphenomenalism. We will first discuss the argument from common sense. We all have a common sense understanding that our mental states, such as our beliefs, desires, and intentions, play a causal role in our behavior. For example, we believe that we choose to do things because we want to do them and that we can avoid doing things if we try hard enough. Epiphenomenalism denies this common sense understanding of the world. Next, there's the argument for moral responsibility. If epiphenomenalism is true, then we cannot be held morally responsible for our actions. This is because our mental states do not cause our behavior and therefore we cannot be held responsible for the consequences of our actions. This is a disturbing conclusion for many people as it seems to undermine our sense of justice. We must also consider the argument from scientific implausibility. It is difficult to explain how mental states could have evolved in the first place if they have no causal effects on physical events. After all, science tells us that evolution is a process of natural selection, and natural selection only favors traits that increase an organism's fitness. Therefore, it is difficult to see how mental states that have no causal effects on physical events could increase an organism's fitness. Then there's the argument from the problem of qualia. Qualia are the subjective experiences of mental states such as pain and pleasure. Epiphenomenalism has difficulty explaining the existence of qualia. If mental states have no causal effects on physical events, then it is difficult to see how they could produce qualia. Lastly, we will consider the argument from the supervenience of mental states on physical states. Some philosophers argue that mental states are supervenient on physical states. If mental states are supervenient on physical states, then it seems that mental states must have some causal effects on physical events. Otherwise, it would be possible for two people to have the same physical states but different mental states, which is a possibility that epiphenomenalism denies. If epiphenomenalism is true, it has a number of important implications. First, this would imply that free will is illusory. If epiphenomenalism is true, then our mental states, such as our desires and intentions, do not cause our behavior. This means that our actions are ultimately determined by physical events beyond our control. This is a disturbing conclusion for many people, as it seems to undermine our sense of free will. It would also imply that moral responsibility is illusory. If epiphenomenalism is true, then we cannot be held morally responsible for our actions. This is because our mental states do not cause our behavior, and therefore we cannot be held responsible for the consequences of our actions. This is another disturbing conclusion, as it seems to undermine our sense of justice. If epiphenomenalism is true, then this would imply that the mind is nothing more than an illusion. Our thoughts, feelings, and experiences are all caused by physical events in the brain, but they have no causal effects on the physical world. This is a humbling conclusion, as it suggests that our conscious experience is ultimately irrelevant to the universe. This may lead to a sense of fatalism and despair. In addition to these philosophical implications, epiphenomenalism could also have a number of practical implications. For example, if epiphenomenalism is true, then it is possible that we could develop medications or technologies that could directly control people's behavior without their knowledge or consent. This could raise a number of ethical concerns. One of the main challenges for epiphenomenalism is the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of explaining why we have subjective experiences at all. Why does it feel like something to be us? Epiphenomenalists have offered a number of different responses to the hard problem of consciousness. One response is to say that the hard problem is not a real problem. They argue that there is nothing to explain, because subjective experiences are not real things. They are just illusions. Another response to the hard problem of consciousness is to say that it is a mystery. Epiphenomenalists who take this view argue that the hard problem is beyond our current understanding of the mind and the brain. However, they believe that it is possible that we will one day be able to explain the hard problem of consciousness, even if we cannot explain it now. Another challenge for epiphenomenalism is the issue of free will. If epiphenomenalism is true, then our choices and actions are ultimately caused by physical events in our brains. This would seem to undermine the idea of free will. Epiphenomenalists have offered a number of different responses to the challenge of free will. Epiphenomenalists argue that they are compatibilists and that free will is still possible even if our mental states do not cause our behavior. They contend that free will does not require that our actions be undetermined. Instead, free will simply requires that we have the ability to choose between different courses of action, even if our choices are ultimately determined by physical events. Epiphenomenalists believe that our sense of free will is illusory. They say that we feel as though we have free will because we are not aware of the physical events that are determining our behavior. However, even if our sense of free will is illusory, this does not mean that we are not free. We can still be said to be free if we have the ability to choose between different courses of action, even if our choices are ultimately determined by physical events. Epiphenomenalists can argue that moral responsibility is still possible even if our mental states do not cause our behavior. They think that we can still be held morally responsible for our actions if we have the ability to understand the difference between right and wrong and if we have the ability to choose to do the right thing. Epiphenomenalism is a controversial view, but it is a serious attempt to solve the mind-body problem. It is a view that is consistent with our scientific knowledge of the brain, but it also has some implications that seem to be incompatible with our common sense experience of the world. As we discussed, there are a number of arguments for and against epiphenomenalism. It is ultimately up to each individual to decide whether or not they find epiphenomenalism to be a plausible view. Thanks for watching. Please give us a like if you enjoyed this video and feel free to comment to let us know your thoughts on it. Also, check out our other study review videos on other philosophers and philosophies.